Hello, and welcome to the second in a series of videos looking at climate change and whether or not what we've been told by the media is correct. The question we're going to ask today is, should CO2 be the pollutant we fear? In his 1945 book Animal Farm, George Orwell famously said, "All animals are created equal, but some are more equal than others." As we're about to see, the same can be said of greenhouse gases, as there are definitely some that are more equal than others. Here's a typical kids picture of the greenhouse effect from NASA, taken from the NASA Kids website. The Earth traps some of the sun's heat, preventing it from escaping back into space at night. My question is, if it was as simple as the kids version, why are we still spending billions of dollars on what Barack Obama called settled science? Of course, as most of us know, the kindergarten version is far from the full story, as the absorption spectrum of the greenhouse gases shows below. As you can see, there are two bands of radiation. In red for the radiation from the sun, and in blue for the radiation coming back from the Earth. The sun's radiation has a much lower wavelength, and this means it has a higher energy, it has a greater frequency. In terms of the greenhouse gases, notice that water vapour rather than CO2 is the most significant greenhouse gas, and water vapour actually accounts for some 90% of the trapped outgoing radiation. CO2 only has one band centred on 15 microns and is also partly covered by water vapour. The other CO2 bands are either out with the Earth's radiation band or are actually in the band of the sun. As a result, CO2 only actually accounts for something like 7% of the radiation absorbed. Methane and nitrous oxide peaks are either outside of the main outgoing radiation band of the Earth or are completely covered by water vapour. One really has to wonder why there is such a focus on reducing cattle in Europe. Another factor to consider is the so-called infrared window from 8 to 14 microns. This is where no radiation is blocked, with the exception of ozone. So has fixing the hole in the ozone layer led to global warming? Well, the American EPA states that ozone has increased by 12% since 1979. The table on this slide shows the relative concentrations of the major greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. As water can vary between 0 and 4%, obviously when it rains, an average of 2% has been taken. As there are 1,000 parts per billion in every part per million, the effect of methane and nitrous oxide is almost negligible in comparison to water vapour. Even the concentration of carbon dioxide is up to 50 times smaller than water vapour. If you were a piece of outgoing long-wave radiation then, the chances of you being absorbed by a methane or nitrous oxide molecule rather than a water molecule is 10,000 to 1 for methane and 60,000 to 1 for nitrous oxide. If you were a gambling man, would you really bet on those odds? Scrapping gas boilers, as proposed by the Scottish and UK governments, will do very little, if anything, to stop global warming. The changes proposed by the European Union on fertilisers will have a similar negligible effect. Remember the chaos that resulted in Sri Lanka when the president decided to go organic and remove fertilisers. Not only were there food shortages, the president himself had to go into exile after there was rioting in the streets. So, is the increase in CO2 natural or man-made? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change states that it is unequivocal that the increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide since the pre-industrial period are caused by human activities. The graph attached shows the IPCC's view of atmospheric CO2 for the last 60 million years. Notice that for the last 800,000 years, the figure never rises above 300 parts per million. Therefore, according to the IPCC, the current rise has to be man-made. However, Dilly argues that this is wrong. As ice core samples are averaged over some 4,000 years, the peaks lose 17% of their value. Adding 17% onto 300 parts per million gives us 351 parts per million. In addition, Dilly argues that new ice during its first 5 million years leaks CO2 back into the atmosphere at a rate of 2.5 parts per million for every 44 feet, resulting in an additional 30 parts per million being lost. This then gives a natural peak of 380 parts per million, fossil fuel burning only adding around 50 to 40 parts per million. Scrabble, on his study, produced similar results, with the maximum upper limit on man-made CO2 rise was 48 parts per million. Does CO2 drive temperature, as we've been told? Well, the tax chart shows both temperature and CO2 concentrations over the last 600 million years. There appear to be three major cold periods: the Ordovician Ice Age, the Carboniferous Ice Age, and present day. While the Carboniferous Ice Age shows similar CO2 levels to today, the Ordovician Ice Age has a CO2 concentration of around 4,400 parts per million. So my question is, how can CO2 drive temperature if its concentration was 10 times that of today in the middle of an ice age? Clearly it can't. In Section 7 of the Assessment Report 6, Working Group 1 report, the IPCC defined equilibrium climate sensitivity as the magnitude of the long-term global surface air temperature increase in response to a doubling of the atmospheric CO2 concentration after the planetary energy budget is balanced. In other words, the temperature increase we can expect for a doubling of CO2. After considerable discussion on the various methods of determining equilibrium climate sensitivity, in section 7.5.5 on page 1006, the IPCC concludes that the most likely value of ECS is 3 degrees C, though there is a very likely range of 2 degrees to 5 degrees, so even themselves are not really sure what the answer is. The table below shows the equilibrium climate sensitive values and likely range of values from a number of leading scientists, all of which indicate that it's less than about 1 degree. So the IPCC figure seems to be considerably higher, by a factor of 3. It is worth noting that the models that most closely replicate the past 40 years of temperature are those that have a low ECS. One of the reasons for the alarmist gift for the current warming as being man-made is the rate of change is rapid in comparison to natural climate change. However, this is simply not the case. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, themselves state that the Younger Dryas, a period named after the flower Dryas octopetala, which flourishes in cold conditions and shown in the picture, was a period of rapid change. The end of the Younger Dryas, approximately 11,500 years ago, saw the temperature in Greenland rise by 10 degrees centigrade or 18 degrees Fahrenheit in a decade. Just let me repeat that. 10 degree rise in a decade. Is that not considerably faster than 1 degree in a century? As well as Greenland, there's also proxy evidence to show a similar abrupt shift in temperature in Europe. The current theory for the cause of the Younger Dryas is a change in meltwater from the Mississippi River to the St. Lawrence River. This resulted in changes to the North Atlantic Ocean circulation, with resulting climate changes around the world. Gas-guzzling SUVs and other cars simply do not feature. In conclusion then, we have looked at various aspects of CO2 from its ability to absorb radiation and drive temperature, to equilibrium climate sensitivity, and whether what we are observing is currently natural or not. In each instance, we can see that there is evidence to suggest that the mainstream narrative is not correct and that CO2 is not the cause of global warming. Dagsved and Moore in their 2023 study published by Statistics Norway conclude that the effect of man-made CO2 emissions does not appear to be sufficiently strong to cause systematic changes in the pattern of the temperature fluctuations. In other words, their analysis indicates that with the current level of knowledge, it seems impossible to determine how much of the temperature increase is due to emissions of CO2. If CO2 is not then the pollutant we should fear, then net zero becomes an incredible act of self-harm for the West. While the United Kingdom has cut emissions by over 40% since 1990, CO2 emissions worldwide have risen by a corresponding 40% in the past 2 decades. There really is no need for Western nations to cut any further until China, which has increased its emissions by 381%, and India, which has increased theirs by 291%, do likewise. In the next video, we will look at whether the net zero approach is viable. Thank you. If you've enjoyed this video, then please like and subscribe.